Hello everyone, Dr. Mark Dennis, CFP here, joining you once again. Welcome to week 4 of our live chat for FIN4126, Financial Decision Making and Planning. In this session, we're covering important concepts from chapters 16 through 19. We'll start with bonds, then explore inflation, and finally take a look at some behavioral finance concepts, as well as the idea of total portfolio management. Each section will connect theory to real-world examples so you can apply these ideas in your own financial decisions. Let's start with bonds. When we talk about the maturity of a bond, we're referring to the number of years until the amount borrowed is repaid to the investor. The longer the maturity, the greater the risk, mainly because there's more time for the issuing company, or in rare instances the issuing government, to potentially default on repayment. This is also a longer period for market interest rates to potentially rise, which would reduce the market value of the bond prior to maturity. Accordingly, this is called maturity risk. Longer maturities typically mean more volatility in bond prices. Next, let's discuss bond quality. Bond ratings range from AAA, the highest credit quality, down to C or even lower, which means they are very risky. Anything below a BBB credit rating is considered a high yield or junk bond, which has a higher chance of default. Why would anyone invest in these so-called junk bonds? Well, higher risk means the potential for higher returns. Basically, they pay a higher rate of interest. Keep in mind, however, this higher return comes with a real possibility of losing one's investment if the issuing company or government can't make the payments. Liquidity is another important characteristic of bond investments. Liquidity refers to how quickly and easily you could sell the bond without taking a big loss. For example, a U.S. Treasury bond is considered to be very liquid. You can sell it quickly and at a fair price. However, a bond issued by a small city government might be much more difficult to sell, and you could have to accept a lower price in order to convert that bond back into cash. To compensate for this extra liquidity risk, less liquid bonds generally offer higher rates of interest. Now let's put the concept of risk and return together. We can express the expected return for a particular bond as a combination of the risk-free rate plus a risk premium. The risk-free rate is what you would earn from an investment with virtually no chance of loss, such as a U.S. Treasury bill. The risk premium compensates you for taking on additional risks, such as liquidity risk, maturity risk, and the risk of possible default. Each of these risks adds to the return investors demand before they will commit their money to purchasing this bond. Bonds pay coupon payments, which are fixed interest payments stated in the bond's contract. These never change, even if market rates of interest do. At the bond's maturity, the investor will get back the principal, also called the par value or face value of the bond. A premium bond will sell for more than its par value. A discount bond sells for less. Discounted bonds tend to see larger price swings when interest rates change. When we discuss bond yields, the coupon yield tells us how much we will receive each year in interest based on the bond's face value. The coupon yield represents the percentage of the bond's face value that is paid annually, though typically in semi-annual increments, to the bond investor in the form of interest payments. The current yield looks at what the investor would earn right now if the bond were purchased at today's market price. The yield to maturity, or YTM, is the total return you would earn if you bought a bond today and then held it all the way until it matures. This is the most complete measure of a bond's return because it includes the following. 1. The annual coupon payments that you would receive, and 2. Any gain or loss as the bond's price moves towards its face value over time. Yield to maturity is the best way to compare bonds that have different prices, different maturities, or different coupon rates because it shows the annualized rate of return over the life of the bond. Here is the formula for estimating yield to maturity. This formula takes into account the bond's current market price, the coupon payments, the face value, and the time to maturity. While you can approximate yield to maturity with a shortcut formula, most professionals use financial calculators or spreadsheet functions in order to be as accurate as possible. This formula helps you understand whether a bond is priced attractively compared to the return it offers. Remember all of that work we did with time value of money at the beginning of the course? This is one of the many ways those TVM concepts are applied as we discount the future cash flows from a bond back to present value. The value of a bond comes from two components. First is the present value of the bond's coupon payments. Second is the present value of its principal repayment at maturity. This formula brings those two elements together so we can compare the value to the current market price and decide whether the bond is a good investment or not. Next, we consider the effects of inflation. Inflation is defined as a general rise in prices over time. It can happen when demand for goods outpaces supply, when production costs increase, when competition is limited, or when there's too much money circulating in the economy. inflation has always been part of our economy, but it has varied over the years. We saw big spikes during the Korean War in the 1950s, as well as during the oil crisis of the 1970s. High or accelerating inflation can erode purchasing power and make it more difficult for households to keep up with rising costs. We can measure inflation using indexes such as the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which tracks changes in the price of a basket of goods and services. Historically, the highest period of prolonged inflation in the U.S. was the decade of the 1970s, 1970 through 1979. Here's a brief example. $100,000 today will not have the same buying power in the future. Even at relatively low inflation rates, purchasing power drops noticeably over time. This is why investors look for ways to earn returns that outpace inflation. Typically, they will find these rates of return in the equity markets as well as the bond market. Let's shift gears to behavioral finance. Traditional finance assumes people will always behave logically, have access to perfect information, and make the best possible choices. In reality, of course, we all have biases, limited knowledge, and sometimes make decisions based largely on emotion rather than logic. Behavioral finance, sometimes referred to as behavioral economics, studies these real-world decision-making patterns. Some critics argue that it's difficult to measure scientifically. However, behavioral finance still offers valuable insights into why people sometimes deviate from purely logical choices. Behavioral financial planning applies these insights to personal financial planning. It takes a look at human tendencies as well as weaknesses and uses strategies to help people make better decisions and reach their goals. Behavioral finance examines many different forms of biased behavior, and two of the key concepts are satisficing and mental accounting. Satisficing means settling for a solution that is good enough instead of the absolute best, particularly when there are many different choices available. Mental accounting describes how we mentally separate our money into different buckets or categories, such as vacation savings, money for bills, or investments, even though money is technically interchangeable. The concept of total portfolio management takes a big picture approach to financial planning. It considers all household resources, both financial and non-financial assets, as well as all liabilities and ongoing expenses. The objective is to create a more complete plan for meeting financial goals. This concludes our Week 4 live chat. If you have questions about any of these topics, bonds, inflation, behavioral finance, or portfolio management, please reach out to me by email, text, or phone. As always, I'm here to help you succeed. See you online.